This week, it's a stimulus showdown in Washington as COVID relief talks appear to go nowhere. Plus, Trump formalizes his war on Chinese tech in a pair of executive orders that could have a miles-long ripple effect throughout American corporations and startups. And finally, we've got a preview of the fall smartphone season, 2020 style. So that means new 5G tech, but also coronavirus delays and a consumer base potentially hampered by unemployment. I'm MacKenzie Sigalos, and this is CNBC After Hours. Let's take a look at how Wall Street did this week. Stocks climbed higher, and all three major indices made solid weekly gains. The Dow had its best week since the beginning of June. Now, Wall Street was watching three big issues that were driving market action today and this week. The first, stimulus negotiations. Now, we've talked a lot about how important government aid has been for businesses and individual people throughout this pandemic. And we've also talked a lot about how many of those benefits have expired. As of now, Congress hasn't been able to agree on another round of funds. The White House has said that President Trump may take executive action on his own. The next theme, the state of the economic recovery. Now, the July jobs report that came out this morning came in better than economists were predicting. And while that is some good news, the reality is that unemployment is still super high, 10.2%. For context, it was 3.5% back in February. And the third issue this week was the escalating battle between the Trump administration and Chinese tech companies like TikTok, which Trump said he would ban if it wasn't bought by an American company by the middle of September. Now, last night, Trump made it official, issuing two executive orders banning Chinese tech companies in 45 days over data security issues. The first order dealt with TikTok, and the second order dealt with WeChat, an all-encompassing app owned by Chinese tech giant Tencent. This WeChat ban could have even bigger implications for Americans than the TikTok order. CNBC's Deirdre Bosa explains why.
Tencent is not just one of the biggest internet companies in the world, but one of the biggest companies in the world. It's listed in Hong Kong with a market cap of nearly $700 billion US. WeChat is a part of Tencent. It is its mobile messaging app, but you can also book ride shares. You can order your groceries. You can even book a doctor's appointment through the app. So many Chinese rely on it for day-to-day items. I would say that there's a few reasons why the implications of banning WeChat would be a lot more significant than, say, banning TikTok. The first is that a lot of Asian Americans rely on the app. It's a messaging app to communicate with their friends and families back home in China. A lot of business people also rely on it for things like communicating with business partners, even supply chains, for companies that actually operate in China and have had quite a bit of success doing so. I'm talking about Starbucks and McDonald's. They operate within the WeChat app, which is a super app in China. So customers actually go in and they can order their coffees or their Big Macs. They can pay for them. They get promotions all within the super app ecosystem. So a ban on American businesses being able to use the app could have important implications for their China sales. Unlike us in America, who might download the Starbucks app to buy our coffees and order ahead, all of that is done within the WeChat app in China. So with Starbucks being banned, that could have major implications. Also, I would say it could have implications for Apple and Google, right? The iPhone, which is very popular in China, if all of a sudden you can't download WeChat from the Apple App Store, Chinese may choose to just buy an entirely different phone, and that really speaks to the importance and the enormous use in day-to-day life that WeChat has over there. We don't know how far the executive order is going to go. If, for example, it just bans WeChat here in the United States, that would affect the Chinese community who relies on that app to talk to family and friends. If, for example, the Trump administration wants to go back and look at all the deals that Tencent has done with American companies, certainly that could have much, much wider ramifications. It could also have a ripple effect on the startup ecosystem because Tencent is such an active investor in some of the biggest private names. Its investment empire spans many countries, but there are a lot of household names in America within that portfolio, including names like Snap, Universal Music. Tencent was an early investor in Lyft and Uber. It also has a number of investments in American gaming companies like Epic Games.
And now let's get to our sound check. Here's a timeline of this week in business told in just a few sound bites.
An exciting proposition for Microsoft. Obviously, it depends on the price. Price is important, and as well as whatever restrictions come with it from a government perspective. But I think it's an exciting avenue for Microsoft to really increase its consumer base.
It is no longer a crisis. This is a 5-alarm emergency in which I believe, and I think the 100 CEOs who signed this letter in support of the Restart Act believes that all roads should lead to small business relief in any stimulus package that Congress approves.
We're not a revenue-generating company yet, but we're coming in like a freight train. I think that's why people are excited to invest, is because it's like kind of getting in early on, or way early on Tesla. And if we were building, 1,000 trucks a year, would be $200 or $300 a share.
The Democratic House put together a $3 trillion, basically liberal wish list that we think goes far beyond what is appropriate for this situation. What I laid out is a starting place, which, as some of my members think is too much.
Can we give a huge chunk of money to the people who are disenfranchised, to minorities who want so badly to stay in business and can't, and to people who are trying to go to college or have student loans, who are minorities, who are the most affected because they had the least chance in our country? That's got to be something both sides can agree to.
Perhaps you mistook them for somebody who gives a damn for what you just described. That's the problem.
If that does not work, the president has instructed Secretary Mnuchin and myself to be willing to enter into a narrower deal that addresses some of the most pressing needs that are before us as a nation. And if those two things do not work, then he's prepared to take executive action on his own.
The Eats business is growing at unprecedented rates. Eats is now at a $30 billion plus run rate. To put that into perspective, when I joined Uber, this was less than 3 years ago, the Uber Rides business was at $30 billion. So we now have an Eats business built in 3 years, all organically at a $30 billion run rate.
We had WeChat coming up yesterday, and we had TikTok before, but the Chinese have not done anything substantive this year. And the question is, this WeChat was the Rubicon which is crossed, and there will be a reaction. Tech, in my view, is the crux of this Cold War.
All right, we got a handful of headlines in the past week about a tech trend that happens every fall. New smartphone releases. Google unveiled a mass market phone. Samsung debuted a slew of products, including some super fancy and super expensive phones. And then there's Apple's announcement from the end of last week that its newest iPhones will be delayed by a few weeks. Now, as we gear up for smartphone season, there's a huge speed bump this year. And it comes in the form of this morning's jobs report. More than 10% of Americans are unemployed. There is massive economic uncertainty gripping the country, and no one knows if it's going to get worse this fall with a potential second wave of coronavirus infections. So it's unclear how many people are actually going to go out and spend money on a new phone. CNBC's tech product editor Todd Haselton broke down all of this in a preview of this year's fall phone releases.
The fall is definitely the busiest season for smartphone launches. It's usually led, or everybody looks to Apple for the new iPhones, and then we're expecting the first 5G phones from them. But then also Google comes out with its latest phones in the fall, and the latest version of Android's released to everybody. So expect that around October, November. That would be the Pixel 5 this year, and a 5G version of the Pixel 4a they just announced. And then Samsung just hit the market, or just announced the new Galaxy Note series phones, and it has a new foldable phone coming sometime in September. So it'll be a busy season. Just for example, if you're looking at the fall sort of releases or an early preview, here's the Pixel 4a. This was just announced by Google. It goes on sale later this month. It costs $350, and it's actually a really nice phone if you just need the basics, like a great camera and a really good screen. Has that. No 5G. This has 5G. It's Samsung's Galaxy Note 20 Ultra. It starts at $1299, so it's very expensive, the other end of the spectrum. Apple announced during its earnings call that there's going to be a slight delay for its iPhones, at least it said beyond September. So I would expect them sometime in October. And again, this has happened before. We've seen other delays too. The Pixel, when I was briefed on the Pixel 4a, for example, they said they wanted to ship this a couple months ago, but they couldn't because of coronavirus and because they weren't able to go visit their factories. But overall, I wouldn't see this as a bad thing for any company. As long as Apple launches an iPhone in the fall for people that want, a new upgrade to the latest device and 5G, it'll be fine. It's not like a year-long delay or a 6-month delay where I think you'd start to see problems. I would expect to see this affect sales with double-digit unemployment at 10.2% today. People are tightening their belts. They don't have a lot of money to spend. Probably on a smartphone, especially because if you're not going out and using these devices, you're more likely to probably be on your computer or a tablet or something like that at home. On the other hand, I think a lot of these companies will probably be expecting that, and I think we'll see trade-in values go up, so maybe offering more money for the current phone you have to incentivize you to trade in your device. In general, I think trade-ins are probably where these companies will make their money, or long-term payment plans, which Apple has. So you can pay for this new iPhone, it'll cost you $20 a month for 2 years, and people will pay for it that way. I think we will see a softer smartphone season this year, unless there's some kind of incredible sale, just because people are focusing probably on spending their money on other things, groceries, necessities, and not so much luxury items like a new iPhone or a new $1,000 Samsung phone.
Okay, time for this week's numbers round. We'll kick it off with 749. Today, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo cleared all 749 school districts in the state to open for in-person classes this fall. Now, Cuomo said that he, along with health officials, will continue to monitor the infection rate, and reopening plans would be revised accordingly. Next, $185 million. Earlier this week, the New York Times reported that it brought in more than $185 million of revenue from its digital products last quarter, compared to about $175 million from its print business. Now, this marks the first time in the paper's history that digital revenue surpassed print revenue, a huge milestone in the changing landscape of the media industry. And finally, 300. Last night, General Motors unveiled the Cadillac Lyriq, an all-electric crossover that the car company has designated as the, quote, next chapter for the Cadillac brand. Now, the Lyriq has an estimated range of 300 miles on a single charge, which is less than the 400 miles that GM had said would be possible for its next-generation electric cars. But it is comparable to the Tesla Model Y crossover, which has a 316-mile range. That's it for After Hours, but before we go, here's one thing to watch next week. Now, we feel like a broken record here, but the biggest thing we're keeping an eye on is that next round of coronavirus relief from Congress. So Republicans want aid, Democrats want more aid, the White House wants more too. As they all debate the details, stay up to date with every development by going to CNBC.com and downloading the CNBC app. We'll be back here in our home office every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday with a new edition of After Hours, so be sure to catch us then.